right. And hopefully everyone sees the slideshow, yes? So welcome everyone to our slightly fun October virtual membership meeting for the West Seattle Transportation Coalition. As we get underway here, we have lots of fun stuff to get to this evening, a little bit of business to get out of the way before we get to our main feature of the night, which will be a King County executive debate with a couple of our locally bred elected officials. We'll do quick welcome and introductions. I believe we have previous meeting minutes for August to approve. And we will spend just a few minutes talking with the Seattle Department of Transportation about the Alki Point Keep Moving Street and a community survey they're doing, which is available in 9 languages. And then we'll get to our King County executive candidate debate with Constantine and Joe Nguyen. After that should wrap up about 8:15. We'll have about 15 minutes before our usual adjournment time of 8:30. We'll talk a little bit about some recent updates from Sound Transit, any old or new business, and then we will wrap up. If you're joining us for the first time, the purpose of the West Seattle Transportation Coalition is to be a peninsula-wide organization working to address transportation and commuting challenges for the nearly 100,000 people who live and work here on the West Seattle Peninsula. And we accomplish this by securing the support of residents, engaging elected officials at all levels to make improvements for all transportation users. We partner with government agencies, like tonight with SDOT, to achieve best outcomes for the peninsula. And we do our best to engage with businesses, community organizations, neighborhood groups, and individuals like yourselves in order to both educate and collect your feedback and share it with those folks that we speak with and partner with. Our goals are affordable and equitable transportation options, particularly in historically underserved neighborhoods, a transportation network that moves people and goods in an environmentally sustainable manner, and investments in transportation infrastructure that match Seattle's growth. Our key priorities in 2021 have been continuing to advocate for restoring capacity in the West Seattle Bridge Transportation Corridor, advocate for funding maximum mobility while the High Bridge is closed, continuing to support Sound Transit 3 light rail planning, and doing our best to monitor the Delridge Way and Rapid Ride H multimodal project, which is a pretty big project happening over here in our corner of the city, especially with all the detours happening. I'm going to hand it over to my co-moderator tonight, Kate Wells, to talk a little bit about how to Zoom and chat and Q&A if you've never done that before.
Hey everybody, the slide shows you some of the controls you have for either raising your hand or adding to the chat. And I'm going to be moderating the questions and answers tonight. If you have a question, there are a couple different ways that you can ask it. You can either raise your hand and I will try to call on you in turn, or you can type it into the chat. You could type it either to me or to everybody, and I can ask it in turn. And if you want, you can also just privately chat with me that you have a question, and we can get you in the queue that way too. So I highly recommend asking the questions yourself if you're comfortable with that. That way you can clarify if needed. I don't always catch all the nuance in your questions. So back to you, Michael.
Thank you. All right, introductions. So with that, I will activate the chat for folks. Obviously, we're not going to do a big round robin. You get to meet myself, Michael Taylor Judd, who's chair of the West Seattle Transportation Coalition. My co-moderator, Kate, is also a board member. But we're going to direct everybody to that chat window now. And we'll ask you, share your name, any, your pronouns, any access needs you might have. What neighborhood in the city are you from? And then our question tonight is, what is your favorite thing to do in White Center? If you need to be added to our WSTC email list. If you didn't receive a reminder tonight or a notice earlier this week about the meeting, we'd love to make sure you hear about us in the future. We tend to send 1, maybe 2 emails a month. If you want to just switch in the chat window to send a private chat message to John Wright, he's also one of our board members and he's in charge of our mailing list. And he'll be sure to capture your email address without sharing it with the entirety of the chat room. And we'll get you signed up as soon as we can. Kate, do we have minutes from August?
We do not. I have not
Okay.
seen the video show up.
Oh, there we go. I think I'm behind getting that. So we will just skip past that and get ready right now for tonight's guest from to have a conversation with us from the Seattle Department of Transportation. Jennifer Muhlenberg is an associate transportation planner with SDOT. You can learn more about Alki Keep Moving Street at the URL there. Once again, there's a community survey in 9 languages that you can share all over your neighborhood with people. And then I believe there's going to be at least a slide also talking about the Delridge and Highland Park Stay Healthy Street. So I dropped a quick URL for that in there also. Jennifer, you should be able to share your screen and get underway.
All right, thank you very much. Let me just pull this up very quickly, and please let me know if you're able to see the Alki presentation. Does that show up for everyone?
Yeah. Yep.
All right. I just want to say, first of all, thanks for having me here tonight. I know I've got, a few minutes, and so I don't think we'll be able to go into a full round of feedback, but we just wanted to come tonight, give you an update on the project, where we're at, and then also let you know about some of our outreach activities, and then also just ask, if you would be willing to give us feedback, either via email or our survey, or give us a phone call. And if we do have questions that do come in, I'm happy to take a few minutes at the end to answer any of those. So just, feel free to let me know. I think Kate can also monitor that, it sounds like, if questions come in. So I'm gonna go ahead and get started. And just like was just mentioned, I'm a Department of Transportation planner. And so I work on the Alki the Alki Point Keep Moving Street. And I'm a project developer for deciding or determining what we should do permanently in that area. So I wanted to start tonight with sharing our mission, our vision, mission, and core values. And just kind of note that this is something that we keep in mind as we develop projects, as we do our outreach, and as we kind of have this transportation, throughout the city. And so just want to keep this at the forefront of our thoughts tonight. I know we've got, a few minutes. So in this time, I just want to cover the background and project area, the existing conditions of the Keep Moving Street, and then where we are now and some next steps. So Alki Point is identified as in Seattle's Bicycle Master Plan, which is really just a guiding document for bike facilities in the city as a future neighborhood greenway. And that just means it's a certain type of bike facility. And in 2020, some of you may know, we implemented a temporary Keep Moving Street as a kind of a COVID-19 response, and it is on Alki Ave Southwest and Beach Drive Southwest, basically just west of 63rd. And I will pull up a project map shortly. And then just do want to note that, this is something that was opened as part of our COVID-19 response as a temporary measure, and it's something where it's a little different from the Stay Healthy Streets that you may know about. There's a few differences. And one of those is that it's not an existing bike facility or neighborhood greenway. And so we really want to take this time to do the outreach and, kind of have the involvement from the public on what they want to see here permanently. And here's just a map. It's the green line on this map. If you can see that, that is our project area. So Alki Ave Southwest and then Beach Drive Southwest, basically the point of Alki Point. And then just a few existing conditions right now. So there are the barricades and the street closed signs at the entrances and then the intersections along the project area. And so this is kind of a similar treatment of most of the Stay Healthy streets. And this is up temporary, and it's been, in a few different variations since we started last May, but for the most part, looks pretty similar to this. So I know that was a lot, but we're gonna kind of move into, where are we now? So we really want to hear from the community, and we're trying to get some feedback on what we should do for permanent design for this location. We are, doing a variety of different outreach events, different things like that, and I'll share more briefly. But just do also want to note that we currently have funding for outreach and early design for this project, but we are working to secure funding for construction. So that's something that as we do this outreach and design development process, we'll also be looking for ways to fund a permanent design for this area. And as was mentioned, we do have a survey. This is one method that we're using for feedback. It is available in a variety of languages, and you can find it on our website, which I'll drop a link to in the chat after the presentation for more information there. We're also doing a variety of different outreach engagement mechanisms. It's something that we wanted to, come to this meeting tonight to share with you so that you know what we're doing and how we're involved in the community, but then also to get your feedback on, what you think we should also, or other means of outreach that we should be doing. So just kind of an overview, we've done a lot of outreach to different groups. We met with Kate a week ago now. So, trying to meet with different groups, also doing some door-to-door with businesses in the area. We have A-frames up on the project site and are also, sent out a mailer recently. So some of you may have seen a mailer come to your home or your residence. Okay, so kind of the meat of what we want to talk about tonight or share with you is, what we want feedback on. And so we'd love to, if we have time tonight, we can get that from you all, or we would really love to get your feedback, in an email, or if you take the survey, that's also really helpful for us as well. So what we're seeking feedback on is what's currently working well with the existing temporary Keep Moving Street, what isn't working well, and then also what have you heard from others, right? So you may have your experience, but then also what have you heard from, folks in your family, your community, your neighborhood groups, and what are they experiencing, what are they feeling with the existing project? And then in addition to that, right, besides just learning what's currently happening, we also want to know what would you like to see here in the future? So with that, we, as a way to gather that feedback, we've identified 3 different options and have those options as kind of a method for us to learn what people think would be helpful or not helpful for the site. Those options are available on our survey. I also have them later in the slides here, but don't have them in depth right now, just because it would be a lot to run through. But when we're seeking feedback from you, we really want to know, which characteristics do you like or do you not like of the options? So that will help us understand if, let's say, you value having separated pedestrian space, or you really value, bikes having separated space from cars. If those are the things that you value or that you want to see in a permanent design, we'd love to hear that. Another aspect of that is there's the existing street closure, which allows local access vehicles, but is closed to through traffic. And so we'd love to know, is that something that you would want to see in a permanent design or not? So with that, I have a slide here. I know it's pretty tiny and most of you probably can't see it, but just wanted to share that, as you're looking at the survey, this is something that you'll see. It's something where we have, visuals and graphics and maps of what those 3 options look like to really give folks an idea of what those elements may look like. I also have them at the end of the slideshow, and so I'm happy to send that out after this presentation, and you can see them in a larger scale as well. So I want to share that. In addition to kind of looking at the elements of what folks want to see in a permanent design, we're really curious too, on the uses of the project, and we've heard some concerns with, access issues or issues to the park and things like that. And so we are really curious to know if, it's important to have more loading zones on Alki Point. If so, which type? And then also just, kind of the consideration of, is parking something that you use to access Alki Point? Is it something that I would value? Or if not, what else would you value? And so we really are seeking feedback too on the loading and parking aspect as well. We know that there's some, there's obviously residences in this area. Most of the businesses are just off of the project area, but parking is also something that they would be impacting that businesses as well. And I know I'm going pretty quickly, but if things come in, feel free to let me know. I just wanted to kind of give an overview. And then one last thing that we're asking is, who else should we talk to? So if you know of someone, a community group or an organization or something like that, where we should reach out to them and get their feedback, let us know. And we would, really value that input. We want to make sure that we're reaching out to a diverse group of folks and getting input from, all types of users. Just kind of an update on where we're at for the project. Right now, through kind of October and November, we have our, kind of really large outreach effort. As I mentioned, right, we have, door-to-door flyering that we've done, mailers, online survey, stakeholder meetings. And so that's kind of the majority of our efforts now through the end of November. And then we plan to kind of wrap up the substantial portion of that around December, and then start developing a permanent design for Alki Point. And that's something where we'll take the feedback from the community, from all the different outreach efforts we've done, and then also talk with different city departments on their guidance. For example, Seattle Fire Department has a non-arterial fire route in this area, so we need to make sure that whatever we do kind of, works with their needs as well. And then in 2022, we will share back the permanent design that we've developed. We'll get feedback on that. If we need to make modifications, we can do that as well. And then if funding is identified, we hope to implement in summer of 2022. So that's kind of where we're at currently. Like was mentioned, we also wanted to do a quick plug. The Delridge Highland Park Stay Healthy Street is having an outdoor open house tomorrow. So that's Friday, October 29th from 2 to 4 p.m. It's on the Stay Healthy Street on 11th Ave Southwest next to Highland Park Elementary. And that team has done a great job of trying to establish different areas where you can go and kind of see some of the examples of what options may be for the Stay Healthy Street. There's the email address on here and a phone number. And so if you've got questions, those are great ways to reach out to that project team, and they can help answer any questions that you may have on that event or just the Stay Healthy Street in general. And the last thing I have is just some of our contact information. So this is our email and phone number, as well as our URL address for our webpage. And like I mentioned, kind of our ask for you tonight is just, to kind of be thinking about some of the questions that we're asking. Feel free to take our survey, send us an email, give us a call. We'd love the feedback. And then also, if you have others that you think should be aware of the project, please either let us know their contact information or share the information on with them. We do have a blurb that kind of has a description of the project as well as a link to the survey. So I'm happy to send that out as well, and can share that if folks want to send this out to a different group or a network as well. So that was a lot of me talking. I'm happy. I think we have a few minutes. If there are initial questions, I'm happy to kind of answer some of those. I can go back to certain slides if others have questions, but really just wanted to say thank you again for having us tonight.
All right, there are a few questions in the chat, so I will read those out for you. So many people I've spoken to are concerned about how to answer the survey. None of the options meet their needs, and they're concerned about how much emphasis is on the main suggestions. Number of votes for additional options to each main design may reflect a certain amount of public option, maybe opinion, sorry, but it doesn't necessarily add up to a good design if final decisions are based on cherry picking a variety of suggestions. How will SDOT adjudicate all the information to meet the overall needs, create the best design, and most importantly, what is SDOT's highest priority for this Stay Healthy Street?
All right.
A lot there.
A lot there. I will start to unpack that.
Yeah.
One thing that I just wanted to emphasize was, and I think it was also mentioned, right, that we are asking for elements that folks like, right? So there's not quite a voting mechanism between option 1, 2, and 3 in the survey. We do ask for, what pieces of the designs that people like. And so, for example, if someone takes the survey and writes under the section for the Stay Healthy Street neighborhood greenway option that they really like the street closure and that is something that they want to see carried forward, but then they also get to the section for the neighborhood greenway and additional pedestrian space, and they say, I also love the pedestrian space option. That is something that I want to see carried forward, right? We can have those two things work in tandem. And so this allows us to see what would work best. And we do have our work cut out for us with taking everyone's feedback. We have quite a few survey responses right now. And so it will be this kind of, looking at what folks value. We do have a question in there that has people rank their values. So that will help us, get an understanding of what people are wanting to see here. We've got a couple questions that ask about, understanding the signage, right? So if people understand what the street closed means. And so we really want to get a holistic idea of, do people understand it as it is functioning now, or does it make sense? And then what are they also wanting to see carried forward? So we do have kind of the mechanism for that. I also want to just emphasize that, the survey is one aspect of what we're going to, take into consideration for our permanent design. We also have, meetings with different stakeholders that we're conducting. We've had door-to-door outreach. And so we're getting feedback from that as well. And so all of that will be combined into our effort to, decide what to make permanent in conjunction also with, like I mentioned, other city departments and groups and what some of their needs are as well. So I would say, we do have, it's a long survey, right? So I know that there's a lot of information there, but I think, if folks give us feedback and there's conflicting, they want this and this, right? Then that is something that we're going to have to work through to determine, on the kind of the individual survey responses, but then also as a whole, I think we have, over, close to 2,000 right now, right? So we have a lot of information to go through. And so it'll just be, that's why we want to take those couple months to really look at everything that we've gotten back and determine what works, what works best for SDOT, what works best for our city partners, but then also, what is a priority for the neighborhood and folks who come from other parts of the city to visit. So hopefully that helped answer some of that. If people do have questions on the survey, our email information is there, our phone number is there. Feel free to call us. You can give your feedback that way. We're happy to set up meetings with groups as well. And so there's lots of ways that you can give us feedback.
Okay. Seal sitters frequently accesses this area, so parking is critical since we have heavy gear to utilize in securing the beach area for marine mammals. So just a plug for keeping some parking enough for that kind of use. I'm going to try to breeze through some of these. There's a suggestion to talk to the Alki Lighthouse residents and workers, like people right in that Alki Lighthouse area. So the areas behind the street closed sign on the southwest part of the point has been no parking. And let's see, of recent, it has been treated similar to a closed bus stop where people feel free to park in. Is that the intent? Oh, it creates a pinch point in the road that you have to commit to before you can see the oncoming traffic. I'm sorry, Hokkaido, would you, do you think you could clarify that one? I think maybe it's the pinch point being unsafe with the visibility around the curve.
Correct. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, if essentially if you're going southbound at the point, the road closed sign that is out in the and I think you showed the picture on the right where it says road closed.
Mm-hmm.
People are parking immediately in front of that, so it forces the people that are going towards the sign to get into the oncoming traffic lane, and you have to commit to going around the corner before you can see what's coming the other way. If there wasn't, and it is, people park there for days sometimes, but if you can actually approach the sign like where the picture is taken and you can see what's coming, then you can pull around it without actually having to drive, because it's a really blind corner, right there. So you can't see around it. This is a vantage point where you're looking straight down the street, but for those, and I live right at the point, so I frequently go out on either direction, but yeah, it's just you have to commit to that corner because there's people parked right in front of the sign, so you're really driving around the corner in the left lane. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for raising that concern. I will definitely bring that back to our team. I know that the barrel is kind of in the parking zone, right, which you mentioned, to allow that space for travel through it. But we'll definitely, I'll bring this back to our team, and if we're noticing anything or if there's anything we can do in the interim, we'll try to follow up on that.
Yeah, if I can with a follow-on, if I'm unmuted. As you can see right underneath the crosswalk sign, this is actually a no parking area, and the curb comes out one lane, so there's actually no parking, but the curb comes out and people are parking there, and that's the problem. Thanks.
Thank you.
And I apologize to Lauren. I missed that you wanted to ask a question.
Yeah, thanks very much. And thank you, Jennifer, for all the work that you do on this street and for coming tonight to talk to us. I just was in a neighborhood meeting with over a dozen people, and the survey came up. They've all filled it out, and it was unanimous that they wanted this to remain a stay healthy street or a keep moving street. The other design elements were sort of, there was no unanimity to that. But my question for you is, why wasn't the primary decision seems to be whether to keep this a stay healthy street or not? Why wasn't that decoupled from any design choices? Why weren't the options all offered 1 through 3 that you provided, and then separately, so it was quantitative data rather than qualitative data that determined whether this, whether the user or the survey taker could say they want it to be a stay healthy street or not?
And I think, I know we're over time a few minutes now, so I want to be respectful of that. So I'll just answer briefly. But we do have the options under each section where folks can say what they do like and what they don't like. And so that's where we can capture if someone says, I like the stay healthy street element, then we'll be able to capture that information. I would say it's not necessarily an option, just stay healthy street or not. We do want to know if folks are supportive of the one way versus, not having it one way. If people want to see the neighborhood greenway elements, which includes speed humps or, speed cushions, if they want to see the stay healthy street designation. And so there are these other elements that we want to consider. And this setup allows us to get that type of response. I'd also say that at the end of the section of the survey, we have a question where people can provide other information. And that's also where they can write if they have a preference on one of the designs, or if they do have, a particular issue with one or the other. And so I would just say that there's, a variety of elements that we want to get feedback on, and not just the stay healthy street versus not stay healthy street element. Okay.
Yeah, I think a lot of the takers of the survey were confused. They wanted the elements of the other options, but they wanted it to be a stay healthy street, so they selected one. Some of them said that they did comment on that or make that suggestion. Others didn't realize they could do that, or that was the way they should fill out the survey. So yeah, so it's not like just a vote for one, really. And so it really is a what elements do you like of this design and what elements don't you like? And so that allows us to get that feedback. I don't believe there's a vote for only one option. So hopefully we do capture that information. Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Right, thank you very much, Jennifer. We really appreciate you taking a few minutes out of your, I'm sure now long day to join us.
Yes.
We, as you said, unfortunately, we've got some tight schedules, so I'm going to keep us moving here as our next guests have arrived. Hopefully, they can both unmute themselves. As very quickly as we move on, we'd like to do our little ads. This also from SDOT. What is Flip Your Trip West Seattle? Flip Your Trip West Seattle is offering support and free rides to those who live or work in West Seattle, South Park, or Georgetown. Sign up today at flipyourtrip.org to receive a special welcome bonus worth $25 in free trips you can use on transit, water taxi, and even e-scooters like Sal the Salmon there in the picture. You can use the Transit Go ticket app, Android and iOS, as well as get your first month free on Metro van pools, personalized trip planning, special events, and more. Additional promotions and specific outreach to communities will follow while the West Seattle Bridge continues to be repaired. So if you live or work in West Seattle, South Park, or Georgetown, and you're 18 or older, sign up now by visiting flipyourtrip.org. So we come to the main feature tonight. We have a King County Executive Candidate debate featuring candidates Dow Constantine, who is our current incumbent King County Executive, and Senator Joe Nguyen, who represents us here in the 34th Legislative District, who is challenging him. You can find out more at their campaign websites there. If you're not aware, Dow Constantine is a fourth-generation Washingtonian and a lifelong King County resident. He's a proven leader, regional problem solver, and effective advocate for our families and communities. Throughout his service in the legislature, on the King County Council, and as King County Executive, Dow has consistently fought for and delivered transportation and transit solutions, environmental conservation and climate action, public health and safety, and built an efficient, well-run government. Learn more at dowconstantine.com. Joe Nguyen, after 12 years of the status quo, he believes we can choose a better future. He got into politics because he was fed up with elected officials ignoring our biggest issues. Especially right now, he says we need leaders who will show up and do the work. Joe also spent his entire life here in King County and currently serves as our 34th LD state senator. His parents fled the Vietnam War and as refugees resettled into public housing in White Center. When Joe was 7, his father was in a terrible car accident. Saddled with medical debt, the family couldn't afford to hire the around-the-clock care he needed, so Joe started working early on to support his family. He worked as a janitor at his high school while working a second job in the evening, and in college, he washed dishes to make ends meet. Joe says, that's the story of King County. We have always been a resilient beacon of hope at the forefront of innovation and believers in an ethic that hard work will secure you and your family's future. That's his American dream story, and now he is the first Vietnamese American elected to the Washington State Senate, and some say it's remarkable to have made it where he is today, that he's one of the lucky ones, but it shouldn't require luck to succeed in Martin Luther King Jr. County. And Joe believes we must choose a better future for ourselves. And he has a lot more to share with you at meetjoenguyen.com. So welcome aboard, both of you. Unmute yourselves and turn on your videos. And if not, hopefully Kate or John or I can help make sure that you're able to do that. Tonight's debate format will run from about now to about 8:15. We're aiming for about 60 minutes of questions. We'll give each candidate 2 minutes to respond with 1 minute for rebuttals if needed. At the end, we're hoping to give each candidate 5 minutes to offer closing remarks. Oops. And time permitting, we may select an audience question or two at the end. I am going to, let's see, have we been able to confirm that?
Oh yeah, you're good. My kids are taking a bath next door, so I'm going to be judicious.
All right, there's Joe.
So they're all
Dow,
set.
do we got you with video? And
I feel like we do. Yeah.
all right. I am going to, well, I have hopped off the train conducting and gone to France, but I am going to go off video and play timekeeper and let my co-moderator Kate ask most of the questions. We've got slides that will feature the questions. And I will let you guys run over a little bit, but you know, if things are going too much, I may simply mute your mic. Unfortunately, I don't have a way to run a timer on the screen because we're not that super tech savvy with Zoom, I guess. Any questions from the candidates before we begin? All right. Take it away, Kate.
All right, Dow, you have been county executive for 12 years now. How would you describe your leadership style during this time? And Joe, I'm sorry, I guess we'll go to Dow first for that one, and then we will let Joe have his time.
Well, thanks so much, and thanks for having us tonight. I would say that my time in office has been marked by a clear ability to collaborate, to get people united around a shared vision, and to get big things done. That certainly is evidenced in the area of transportation, though in many other areas as well. For example, when I first took office, I inherited a South Park bridge that had to be immediately closed. For safety reasons, we had no money, but we brought together all the community stakeholders. I actually stood at a whiteboard and listed out what we'd need to do to replace the bridge. And then we went united to Washington, D.C., got help from Patty Murray, and in 2013 opened the new South Park Bridge. A much bigger project, of course, was Sound Transit 3. I had been the first elected official to call for going to the ballot with Sound Transit 2, and ultimately we got it passed. But Sound Transit 3 was a much bigger bite, finally getting to the 3-county regional high-capacity transit system we've always needed. And we brought together business and labor, environment, and educational institutions, community activists, all speaking with one voice about the need to finally do this for our region. And in doing that, I also insisted that we finally bring high-capacity transit to West Seattle and, yes, to Ballard. And we got that planned, to the ballot, and passed. Every time we've had a big challenge, I have been able to unite disparate voices around a shared vision and push our region forward. And that same personality of our administration really paid off in COVID, because we were able to unite people around a public health approach, center experts, and save thousands of lives. And now we've achieved the second highest vaccination rate in the nation using the same strategy. I'm really proud of the work we've done, and I'm really pleased to be here tonight for the conversation.
Okay, thank you. And Joe, you have only been a state senator for one term, but you are already seeking a higher office. So tell us how you would offer a different leadership style.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And again, I have kids next door, so if you hear them, they're in their bath time. So what's interesting is that the incumbent brought up Patty Murray. She actually was only in her first term in the state Senate before she ran for the US Senate. And look at the fantastic work that she's been able to do for our state right now as well. And especially at a time like this, when we're seeing so much happening because of this pandemic, a lot of these issues that have been exacerbated over the past couple of years that have been persistent for decades, we need leadership with a vision that is inclusive, that reflects the future of what this county can actually look like as well. And in the legislature, I think the description of how I have led in that space has been urgent, but also effective as well. And in fact, the Seattle Times had an interesting comment in their article where, I'm known for being a liberal campaigner, but also effective legislator, bringing coalitions of people together in a very short period of time. And I believe that's what we need right now as well. We are at a once in a lifetime moment where we can decide what our future looks like, where we can include voices that have historically been left out. So the fact that we've been able to get so much stuff done at the legislature over the past couple of years, simply by having lived experiences, simply by having diverse voices at the table, I think is one of the key points that we would make. But candidly, a lot of my leadership style is from behind. It is giving people credit for the work and then being able to kind of roll up our sleeves to get things done as well. And that's why we've been able to do so much, whether it was on progressive revenue, on funding for basic needs, on ensuring that we have resources for our most marginalized communities. That's how I would lead, is including the folks who are impacted by policy. I believe that the people most impacted by policy should also be at the table in power as well. And that's how we'll lead.
Thank you. All right, how do we change the way King County Metro seeks public input? As a specific example, planners tell us it now takes up to 2 years to change current bus routes or add new ones. How can community organizations and neighborhood groups participate in a more inclusive and equitable way in improving service that in many places still follows the same historical routes from 100 years ago? We'll go ahead and start with you, Joe.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I'll break it up into two parts as well. And what's interesting is back in March 2016, there was a concerted effort specifically to kind of slow down that process. There's now a 3-stage public process by which these routes are changed. The first one is initially learning about the routes and what we need. The second one is engaging the mobility board, getting input from the public. And then the last one is sending it to the council for approval. So that adds a bit of time within that process. So how can we make this a little bit faster? Potentially having a hybrid model will be to find potential routes that we can then go a little bit quicker, whether it's for link extensions. So for instance, UW opened in 2016, but that route around that area was only truncated in 2020. So there's a lot more that we could be doing when we see that sound transit is being enabled, and we can readjust how the other routes are being handled as well to better service our communities. And also, one of the other things that we could be doing, in addition to working better with our other jurisdictions, is the last phase where it takes it to the council for approval, making sure that they're engaged up front oftentimes can negate some potential issues that happens later on. I will call out that there was an executive order back in 2014 to kind of merge what Metro and Sound Transit are doing to speed up the decision-making itself as well. I think that can be augmented. It wasn't nearly enough to kind of get that going. So one of the causes of why it takes a bit of time to actually implement these is because of that public process, which we'll talk about how that is important. The other part is also for Metro management to make the decision in the first place to actually start this process to make this shift. So for instance, there are routes that it will take a bit of time. They're a bit cautious for them to start deciding when to make that change. And that could be years leading up to it as well. So in addition to this public process that could take 2 years, ensuring that we have the decision-making upfront and not so necessarily cautious, I think would be important to speed it up as well. So those are kind of some of the ways that we would go about speeding it up. And I think in terms of the community engagement, what's interesting is that you mentioned the routes have been following the past 100 years. Oftentimes it's because they're the same as what the old streetcar lines were. The geography and the terrain here is kind of unique, where it became difficult to have public transit all over the place. So that's one of the reasons. But I think planners can do outreach to community groups. I think the outreach coordinators are doing a good job being engaged. I think maybe trying to get feedback from folks who aren't necessarily part of that process. I've ridden transit most of my life, and I don't think I've ever given feedback in my civilian life. So that's a few ways to kind of get involved. I don't know how much time we have left, so I'll leave it at that.
Okay, great. Dow.
I don't know what that noise was, but yes.
Is that the timer? Is that what we should look at? Okay.
I've always been committed, and my administration's kind of core personality is continuous improvement. And that applies to King County Metro as everything else. Metro's continually working to improve the public process. One of the changes that's very much under the hood that I made is that we were saddled with a very political way of allocating transit hours over the years. And we changed that to a values and criteria-based allocation system. And that was difficult because it required county council members to be willing to let go of some of the control they had over divvying up transit hours to their neighborhoods. But we did it, and we're continuing to refine that. Under my leadership, Metro and all King County departments have been directed to lead with social equity in everything we do. And in the transit world, we established an equity cabinet to provide feedback on outreach policies and communications. And West Seattle and White Center are represented on that equity cabinet. We've also dramatically increased our translation of materials into languages used in various parts of the county. Metro's been focusing on hiring more diverse workforce on all levels. COVID gave us the opportunity to look at where the service was allocated throughout the county and who was using it when the economy went down. And it turned out, not surprisingly, that there were certain areas of the county where transit-dependent riders lived, where they kept riding when everyone else stopped riding the bus. And we are now working on revising the transit allocation criteria to take into account more the transit-dependent communities for bus service. Most of the riders are from low-income communities. We need to use the data to make sure that people can always have the mobility that gives them access to opportunity. This data, along with direct outreach to community conversations, helps inform the service needs. Route planning does indeed take time, and the public engagement part of it takes a lot more time, but it's critically important that that happen. And the technical work is not unimportant too. That cannot be, you cannot shortcut that work. Service changes happen twice a year in March and September. I'm sure everybody in this meeting knows that, and are informed by ridership needs, public outreach, and system resources. And while the wait can seem long, Metro can and should be transparent and responsive at every step of the process. Thanks.
Okay, Senator, would you like to follow up?
No, that's good.
Okay, great, we'll go on. This next question comes from Katie Wilson at the Transit Riders Union. King County's main tax options for funding transit, sales tax and flat car tab fees, are regressive and have a history of failing at the ballot, leaving areas of the county outside Seattle with substandard bus service. How do you plan to fund transit through more progressive revenue sources?
Am I first?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, you are.
Okay.
I'm new to this.
So we really, just as Katie says, have very limited options at the county. All tax authority is created by the state and presented to cities and counties. And so we have 1/10 of a cent remaining sales tax authority, and then we have that flat card tab fee. And it is, I don't know what that was. And it is a significant barrier to us adequately funding transit. Washington State underfunds transit worse than just about any state in the nation, from the state level to the locals. Our goal is to make sure that we're providing the highest level of transit for everybody in this county, and particularly those who are transit dependent. We need the state legislature to make the tax system more progressive and to provide us with a way to pay for transit that is based more on the taxpayer's ability to pay, how much they have and how much they make. I went to the ballot earlier with a 1/10 of a cent sales tax opposed by the Seattle Times to try to keep transit on the road. We barely lost. Seattle went back with their own funding measure and won, which is why we have a two-tiered system in King County today. I want to go county-wide with a funding measure, but I would sure like authority to have it be something other than a sales tax.
Thank you, Senator.
Yeah, no, I agree that it is incredibly regressive. And I think one of the biggest things that we've championed over the past few years is more progressive revenue for our state as a whole. And the incumbent obviously knows that because he was in the legislature 25 years ago during that time as well and could have acted upon this. So as much as the state is at fault, which I do agree, we do need to fight for more progressive revenues and not just talk about it. You know, we were able to fight for, say, for instance, capital gains last year, which was highly contentious, but obviously very necessary to fund basic needs and early childhood education and whatnot. I have already been in talks with some unexpected, I guess, allies potentially in this space, because I think even some of the larger corporations in this area understand that we need to have robust transit infrastructure for their businesses to be successful as well. And there are a variety of options that I think we should be pursuing in order to make this happen. So whether it is based off of a square footage lease, the number of employees that we had, whether it's a statewide wealth tax that could then siphon some money towards the county as well. I think there are a number of opportunities that we could potentially employ. And what's interesting is that the infrastructure bill that we're seeing at the national level, one of the unlikely people to support it early on was actually Jeff Bezos, who's known for being anti-tax, because some of that was going to go to infrastructure that would be important to them. So I think there's an important discussion to be had with our business community in order for us to make this happen through the legislature as well.
Okay, thank you. Michael, I don't see the screen sharing. I don't see the slideshow anymore. Does anybody else? Is that on my end?
No, I don't see it either.
Yeah.
Okay. There we go. Thank you. Let's go one step further with a question you were asked during the debate last night on Rainier Avenue Radio. During the early part of the pandemic, ridership plummeted, and so did Metro's revenues. Metro rolled back service. Joe, you have called for free bus service for everyone. Dow has expanded free bus service to a greater portion of the population. At the same time, the average household income in Seattle is $128,184 with a poverty rate of 10.96%. Is providing free transit to everyone the best use of tax dollars? And if so, how do you fund that when there are so many other public needs? And we'll start with Senator Nguyen.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that's part of our regressive nature as well. And as somebody who relied on the bus growing up, sorry, they're back. I think they've got the pajamas on. As somebody who relied on public transit growing up and throughout college and also afterwards as well, I can tell you that it is costly. And for somebody who's making minimum wage, even paying that $2 there and back can add up really fast. But the reason why I care so much about free transit is actually less about transit so much as about what the future of an equitable society could look like. Because to me, transit is the foundation by which we can tackle climate change. Transit is the foundation by which we can tackle affordable housing. Transit is the foundation by which we can give people access to economic mobility as well. So for me, it's not just about having access to transit, it's what that can unlock for people in our communities. And that was transformative for me. And that's why I think it's so important that it's an investment in something bigger than just, our bus routes. It's a way for us to get people off of the roads. It's a way for us to lower carbon emissions. It's a way for us to have a transit spot that we can build affordable housing and transit-oriented development. So for me, it's an investment in all of those things. And I will just say that oftentimes in our society, whether it's at the county or the national level, we find ways to fund things like a $1.8 billion legal system. We spend hundreds of millions of dollars on jails. But when we talk about things like subsidized transit or free transit, people kind of balk. So for me, it's just having a different type of vision that is inclusive, that invests our money in a way that I think people would actually want us to invest that money. And I will say that this is an idea that will be aggressive, that takes leadership as well. And although we've done a lot in the legislature, this is certainly something that can be driven at the county level and building people together in order to make this a reality.
Thank you. Executive Constantine.
Oh, thank you. Mine's actually still in the tub, and I hope she stays there until 8:15. I'm sympathizing with my opponent over the racket in the background. You asked the right question because it's all about trade-offs. Of course, it'd be great if things were free, but if you fully subsidize one thing, it's going to make it more difficult to pay for other things. And the question is priorities. What we have done is prioritize making transit affordable to everybody in the county based on their income. So I created the Orca Lift card. So people of limited incomes would be able to pay much less. And we created a free fare card. So those that are truly low income can ride transit for free because we want everybody to be able to access it. But it is true that people making six figures don't need a free bus ride. It is true that the businesses that are paying most of the fares and buying those bus passes for their employees don't need a big break at the expense that people would have to pay the sales tax to make up just part of it. And what would really happen is that we would have to cut a bunch of service for people who are dependent on transit because it would mean a several hundred $100 million hole in our annual operating budget. So what if the legislature were to create a funding source that allowed us to make transit free? Well, that would be great as long as they didn't do it at the expense of some other priority, like, I don't know, childcare or healthcare that would help people, the same people we're trying to help, have more successful lives. I hope that we can have more conversation about this, but I gotta say that just coming out and announcing as your campaign platform, free transit for everyone, when you've never done anything on the Senate Transportation Committee to make that reasonably possible is just irresponsible.
What if I rebuttal real quick? It's so funny because we get asked this question all the time, and depending on the group that we're in, he's either in or out with this idea. So I always am curious to see kind of how it plays out. But what's also interesting is that he mentioned it, that most of the fares are actually paid for by these larger corporations having their employees be covered for transit. So fares is about 15% of the revenue for Metro. About 60% of that is actually covered by these larger corporations. So the amount that you would need for fare box recovery is not as much as what people would normally think. So you certainly could have a different alternative, even augmenting it with a more progressive option to cover that amount as well. So this is not as outlandish as it may seem. Other jurisdictions are already doing this, whether it's cities or states and even other countries as well. And one of the biggest things that we have a problem with too is fair enforcement in this area, where oftentimes our bus drivers don't feel safe, and oftentimes that happens during the fare recovery process. So this just makes sense as an investment for our community. It's in the hundreds of millions per budget cycle, which we can cover with another transit benefit district as well. And like I said, the ramifications are more widespread than just the transit itself. It's a way for us to then have a vision for climate change, for affordable housing, for economic mobility as well. That's the difference between us in this context, is when you look at a hard problem, I have a vision to change it versus just fighting and saying no.
Can I have a rebuttal then?
Yes.
Okay. I mean, if you had a vision to change it, why didn't you do something at the legislature? We at the county don't have the authority to create these revenues that you're talking about. What I'm concerned about, let's just talk about environment, okay? If we want people who are making six figures to choose transit over cars, the difference for them is not going to be the couple bucks that it costs them to ride transit. The difference is going to be providing transit that is objectively better than sitting in traffic. That's why we're building the high capacity light rail system. That's why we're deploying the rapid ride bus lines. And that takes money. Those are the things that are going to get more people, not transit dependent people, but people with a choice, out of their cars and into transit, making transit better.
Thank you. Let's see, the next question should pop up here. All right, speaking of public needs and investment, Dow, you have been attacked by some folks for underinvesting in unincorporated areas like White Center and Skyway, while your defenders argue that the state is promoting annexation or incorporation for these urban areas in our counties. Where do you stand on the long controversial issue of annexing White Center to Seattle, and what should be done while waiting for that to happen? And I believe I start with you, Dow.
I mean, my name's on it, so it must be. Yeah, you know, I've represented White Center in the House and the Senate on the county council, and now as county executive. Of course, I've lived in West Seattle my whole life. I spent a lot of time in the neighborhood. We have continually invested in White Center as we're able, and invested in Skyway as we're able. As you may or may not be aware, the county is not accorded the authority for a utility tax or a business and operations tax that cities have the authority for. The cities are given that because they are expected to provide urban level services. Urban areas under the Growth Management Act are supposed to be inside of cities where they have access to that money, and to the benefit of those cities' commercial areas that pay much more tax, and those cities' higher value real property that pays more property tax. Yes, it would be better for White Center to be a part of either Seattle or Burien. It would be better for Skyway to be part of either Seattle or Renton. We've tried annexations, including in Skyway, where we attempted an annexation to Renton that failed. But unless the state changes the law and gives us more tax authority in those urban unincorporated areas, it is very difficult to come up with the kind of money that a Seattle or a Renton can generate within their borders to pay for urban level services. Nevertheless, we're putting tens of millions of dollars into each of these places, including a $10 million participatory budgeting process where we gather residents to decide how that money will be invested. 1.3 million to businesses just in White Center for COVID, 108,000 just to fire affected businesses in the last month. We've got a lot of investment going on in both of these places, but the underlying structural challenges have to be taken on.
Okay, Joe.
Yeah, no, this is an important issue for the White Center community. It's often very contentious as well. So I do lean towards the need for White Center to annex with Seattle simply for the costs associated with it as well. But ultimately, I think it is up to the individuals and residents who live there. And this is a history of being underinvested for a long time. As somebody who is from that area, born and raised in that area, it has always been very difficult. And what I will say is that there's just going to be a theme that you'll hear likely throughout this debate too, where it's always going to be the state's fault, right? So I believe that the county executive should be in charge of mobilizing coalitions, being able to work across jurisdictions. And candidly, if the executive has been there for 25 years, you should have a history of experience with that as well. So being able to not just complain about something that had an influence over for the past 25 years, many of which in the legislature, but working with our leaders to solve these problems, I think is going to be key for some of these issues as well.
All right. Some quick yes, no questions. Do you ride transit to work and recreation when possible? Joe?
I haven't been to my office in 2 years, but generally, yes, when I did go there.
And Dow?
Yes, when possible.
Have you toured the West Seattle Bridge repairs, Dow?
No, I've not even been invited to tour the West Seattle Bridge repairs.
I think we could probably change that. We should change that. Yes.
And Joe?
I went a couple of weeks ago, and I'm very excited to see that it is on track.
Great. Joe, would you support the push to have the King County Board of Health repeal the bike helmet law?
Yes.
And Dow?
I would have them suspend its enforcement. I can explain more, but these are yes or no, so I'm not going to go on.
Yeah.
And Dow, would you support more speed cameras and legislation against blocking bus lanes?
Yes, we lobbied hard for this, and I think it's a great idea.
And Joe?
Yes, and we passed it while I was in the legislature.
Okay, great.
Teamwork. See, that's good teamwork there. I will.
All right. The winner of this race will presumably sit on the Sound Transit Board. How do you plan to represent the residents of West Seattle in making final route decisions for light rail expansion to our peninsula? And I'm going to just do these as two separate questions. So Joe, why don't you start with this one?
Well, obviously, this is going to be a huge decision for us as part of ST3, West Seattle being that route associated with it. The realignment plans, given the gap in affordability, obviously put a wrench in a lot of things as well. And being able to figure out which route would be best, not just for West Seattle, but how do you orient the terminus to get down south? So those are going to be the biggest things for me, is how do we ensure that we get transit here on time? Obviously, faster would be fantastic if appropriate, but also making sure that we're set up to go down south to be able to serve other areas as well.
Okay, Dow?
I've consistently been a strong advocate on the Sound Transit Board for West Seattle. And as I said before, it's coming to West Seattle because I insisted on it. We are, obviously working with financial constraints, but I have been a real critic of this realignment process because I think the emphasis should be on figuring out how we can gather the funds to build what the public approved. I made sure the Sound Transit 3 plan included planning to head south from West Seattle to White Center to Burien and even across Tukwila to Renton. And even when the Sound Transit staff came forward with a plan that had an east-west alignment for the junction station, I told them that was not going to do because next stop is White Center and we have to be headed south. We will come up with third-party funding. I think there needs to be funding, but that may be your next question. There needs to be funding from local jurisdictions, but I have some other ideas about how we can leverage more of the funds coming into Sound Transit to get this done and get the line open to West Seattle.
Okay. And yep, you both have expressed support for light rail to White Center. Without a tunnel, that could mean bulldozing miles of roads or through homes and businesses, but a tunnel to the junction will require some third-party funding. This is particularly important to North Delridge residents concerned about guideways towering 140 to 150 feet above their homes without one. So what will you do to help us secure that funding? And Dow, I'll take that one back to you first. Do you have any specific ideas for finding that funding?
Yeah, well, there's two things. First of all, there's locally generated, there's obviously, federal funding and so forth, but there's locally generated funding, and the city of Seattle has a robust economy, although, rickety tax tools to use. This is another one of those situations where people are being taxed based on what they make and what they have. there would be plenty of money to do everything without anyone breaking a sweat. I do think, though, as well, that we got to deal with the finance part of this, the financing part of this. Sound Transit has revenue coming in regularly off into the future. They have an artificial limit on the amount they can borrow at any one time. And that constrains the speed at which they can build and the kinds of investments they can make. I've been working with others to figure out if the county or the city of Seattle or others can help by, in some fashion, bolstering Sound Transit's borrowing capacity so that we can move ahead a pace. Right now, governments can borrow money for almost nothing. It makes no sense for us to pay in the future on a cash basis and delay by years or decades the arrival of the transit people need. It's a much better value to borrow the money for a low interest payment and get the system in place now. That's what's good for our economy. That will generate the greater net return in the long run, and we're working on that right now.
Okay, Joe?
Yeah, and then the interesting thing about that question too is that there was a survey done, I think this past summer, that showed 71% of voters in Seattle would actually support new funding measures to avoid ST3 delays. So I think not just West Seattle, but Seattle as a whole, our members are pretty engaged in this space. In terms of the bonding capacity as well, I'd propose a public infrastructure bank. It's kind of not a new concept, not one that has been generally used very much as well, where if we had a public infrastructure bank, we could potentially leverage some of that resources in order to help fund particularly these types of projects and also affordable housing as well. But that's a newer concept. I did a white paper in terms of what that could look like at the state level, but I think given the resources that we have in King County, potentially could be an option for it as well. And like the incumbent mentioned, I really hope that Joe Manchin doesn't tank the infrastructure conversations that we're having right now as well, because that certainly could be helpful in this discussion.
All right. So the county plays a role in ensuring that our main transportation corridors are workable and address the pressures of both growth management and climate change. Right now, there seems to be a disconnect between promoting density and providing the infrastructure to support that. How would you bring planning groups together to create a more shared vision and make sure it gets funded locally? Joe?
Yeah, what's interesting, there was a bill last year that we fought for, or at the very least a provision. The more progressive members wanted to include climate change as part of the GMA, and ensuring that as we do land use planning, that is a core feature in that decision-making process. And the county is in charge of that. And one of the key things too is in urban areas, making sure that we have more density, but even keeping our rural areas more green as well to ensure that we have CO2 embodied within those particular lands. So I think that's one of the biggest things that we could be doing is ensuring that we have that authority in statute. So that way it is in fact a part of the conversation and not just a afterthought as we work on these particular issues. But kind of like what we mentioned before, these things are all related. Planning for land use, transit, affordable housing, even the impacts that we have on economic mobility, they're all interrelated, and that's how we should be viewing these things. So making sure that's the conversation that's being had, that's the vision for the future, is kind of how we would steer that going forward as well.
Okay, Dow.
Well, throughout my time in office, I've been a leader on growth management. I led the county through the politically charged thicket of the adoption of the critical areas ordinances, of comprehensive plans, and maintaining the urban growth boundary has been an overarching priority. We have a land conservation initiative to protect our last best places, forest plan to store carbon in all of the publicly owned lands and soon privately owned lands as well. And we are working every day to restore our natural environment and preserve farmlands. But you cannot do that without making the urban areas attractive places for people to live and work. That's why I was the first elected official to call for putting Sound Transit 2 on the ballot, and why I led the region in putting together the much bigger Sound Transit 3. We have to create transit-oriented communities. When I called for the passage of Sound Transit 2, I said, the transportation we build today is the land use we will live with tomorrow, and that is an absolute fact. When you build freeways everywhere, you get sprawl and land consumption. When you build high capacity transit with dozens of urban stops where people can have homes and businesses, you create a much different land use, one that will benefit us for generations to come. People understood that when we voted on Sound Transit 3. It is a vision that this region largely now has bought into, and we just need to push the cities to zone better and to create more housing density near transit.
Unmuting definitely helps. Another question from the Rainier Avenue radio debate last night. Both of you have called for new programs as well as expansion of services, housing, and transit. Both of you have called out Washington State's regressive tax system, the worst in the nation, for its unfair burden on lower income people. Given that Washington voters have repeatedly turned down income tax initiatives, what do you propose to do to pay for the things you have called for? Dow?
We need the state. My opponent doesn't like me blaming the legislature, so I'll say the governor, the legislature, and everybody to really engage in a serious conversation about this. The whole thing for decades has been this cartoonish battle. Income tax is the third rail. We can't talk about it, et cetera. I think what we need to do is get our major sort of newspaper of record engaged, labor unions and business organizations, and then the sort of political class and the people to talk seriously about what it means for a progressive state like this with a great economy to have the worst tax system in the country. That is the conversation we sought to start when I was in the state Senate, and we authored the State Tax Study Commission legislation. William Gates, the senior, took over as chair of that committee. They created a plan that included an income tax and a balance of other taxes. He went to the ballot with an income tax, and yes, it failed. But I believe that we have to really discuss seriously with the people what it would look like to have a system where people are taxed on what they make each year and on how much they have. Because if everybody was taxed based on that, with those having the least paying nothing and those having the most paying a proportionate share of what they have, we would be able to do everything that people need without it hurting our economy, in fact, helping our economy, and without anyone being unfairly burdened. That is the system we must put in place in this state.
Yeah, and I actually don't mind blaming the state legislature. That's literally why I ran for office. I just think it's odd to come from somebody who was there for a long period of time as well that could have helped fix some of these issues. And that coalition that was mentioned is actually called the Tax Structure Work Group. It was part of a proposal that I helped support a couple of years ago, and I'm on right now as well, to think about how we can restructure our tax base in Washington State to be much more equitable. And it has a broad base of folks who are engaged, including Republicans and business leaders and folks in the labor community and also the legislatures as well. And what's interesting is that when you sit down and have these honest conversations, you'll find that people are more aligned than you would have initially realized. Because there is a lot of fear and rhetoric when it comes to taxation. The hardest things to do in the legislature is raise taxes or cut services, right? And we're talking about both at this point. But it takes that thoughtful engagement. It takes that that willingness to be at the table to have tough conversations to make sure that we get these things done. And that's why, after talking about progressive revenue in the legislature for so long, we've been able to do so much in that space over the past few years. Being able to have capital gains, which is something that people have been fighting for a long time, but also progressive revenue means lowering it for folks who can least afford it. So for instance, funding the working families tax credit as well, or even having a progressive REIT, real estate excise tax, so that the vast majority of properties were actually going to be decreased. So we have to talk about both. And I think that's where we get in trouble sometimes as progressive Democrats, is that we talk about raising it, but not necessarily about the investments that we're going to make, or how do you balance it out. So that work is being done right now in the legislature. I do believe that we are on a good path for what that could look like in the future. And I think people are realizing, even folks in the more conservative circles, that it's not tenable to do what we're doing right now. So that is, I think, the root cause of a lot of the inequities that we face, whether it's housing and affordability, homelessness, underinvestments in our school systems. All that stuff happens because of our tax structure. And that's why I ran. But I also believe that the county executive is a bully pulpit that we can utilize to kind of push that narrative forward as well.
Okay. Thank you. And we are opening it up to audience questions. If you would like to put those in the chat, we can ask them for you, or you can let us know that you've got a question. Since there isn't anything there now, I'm just going to ask my question that I just posted. If you're presented with a choice of adding service to Metro or hastening electrification of the fleet, which would you choose?
I mean, I can answer that.
Oh, I'm
because
yeah.
I mean, I've had to wrestle with that quite a lot. And the answer is you want to increase service to meet demand and even push demand, as we're doing right now. I mean, we've put like 97% of pre-COVID surface on the streets, even though only 50% of the ridership is happening right now. But we want the service to be there when people decide to going back to work, so they don't choose the car and get in that habit. But we've also not put out service that no one will use. We want to put the money into the electrification, because one of our main purposes in having a transit fleet is to reduce commuting and reduce the climate impacts. And converting our system to an all-electric fleet is an extremely high priority. We're going to have the, I think, second largest electric bus fleet as of the middle of next year, and we're pushing for a 100% electric fleet. We have about 1,500 coaches between us and the Sound Transit coaches we operate. We're pushing for an all-electric fleet by 2035 now. I've just been able to move the goal up 5 years. It is critical that we do that, even as we deploy the electric light rail system. And then there's much more that we need to do to wring the rest of the carbon out of the transportation system, the built environment, and of course, electrical transmission.
Okay, Joe?
Yeah, no, this is a fantastic question as well. What's funny is because one of my first two bills, the first one was raising the standards for cars so that they emit less in Washington State. And the other one was ensuring that building standards are higher so that they emitted less CO2 as well. So it's important for us to think about this holistically. And when you talk about, say, for instance, adding services, does that then lower the propensity for folks to get in their cars and obviously the CO2 associated with it as well? Or does it give people access to other things that they may not necessarily have? So I'm a huge believer in the electrification of our fleets, including our ferry systems and otherwise as well, but making sure that we're able to get people out of cars, because that has other ramifications in terms of decongestion, safer streets, otherwise as well. But it would be a tough call. You would have to be thoughtful in terms of where that might potentially happen. I would probably advocate for it to ensure that the communities that are underserved still have access to the bus services, just because they may not have another route to be able to go. And then with the remaining resources, go towards electrification as well. But the transportation sector is one of the largest emitters of pollution. The buildings are the other one as well. And we need to be tackling that holistically.
And Joe, you're going to go first this time. I'm declaring it ahead.
Sounds good.
Do
Thank you.
Yeah. I'm not a moderator professionally, you know. Do you support having the county council look at expanding the water taxi fleet in response to calls for a return to the old mosquito fleet in our local waterways?
You know, I've worked with legislators in the 26th district, which has the fast ferries that happen right now as well. And full disclosure, that's the main way that I get to downtown now. My wife and I and our family have aquarium tickets. So we make a point to take the water taxi to get across. And it's a fantastic experience. Usually we'll get down to the water, have some lunch, get across, and then be able to spend time downtown and come right back. I would support expanding that. And then what's interesting is I visited before the pandemic, some Nordic countries that also had ferry systems as well in terms of that style. And I've seen some designs and developments for ones that are more passenger focused in the sense of forward-thinking types of design. I would certainly support it. I don't have the cost structure kind of placed out in my head in terms of what that would look like, but I do appreciate the council right now expanding the services for the summer hours through the winter as well.
Okay, Dow.
So first credit Greg Nichols, who got the West Seattle passenger ferry going with a little leased boat and a couple borrowed docks. I led the creation of the King County Ferry District when I was on the council. That allowed us to formalize and make permanent the operation of the West Seattle Ferry, as well as take over from the state the Vashon passenger route that they were trying to abandon. Then we were able to put together the funding, mostly thanks to Norm Dix and Patty Murray, to build 2 new boats. We built the new dock, mostly with grants at Coleman Dock. And I have always been an advocate of expanding waterborne transit. I do think that we have an opportunity looking forward, just as we're doing with the bus fleet, to look at electrifying the propulsion in those vessels. There's some work going on in the Bay Area right now around that. I'm really excited about what the possibilities can be. And I think that with the engineering know-how we have here and constituency that wants to see green transit, we could have a chance to help lead that revolution in waterborne transit.
Yeah, and not a rebuttal, but I will call out that Vigor is in our district right down the way, and they've done a lot of work in this space as well.
Cars idling along the bridge detour route through White Center causes localized pollution. Does the emergency bridge repair budget include tree planting? Dow first.
Yeah, well, I can honestly say I have no idea. This is a City of Seattle deal. We are giving the city $5 million in transit money. We expanded transit to help people during the bridge closure. We are pleased that the City of Seattle is helping fund actually that expansion of the water taxi service over the winter. And I will just say for the record that I didn't find out that the West Seattle Bridge had any problems at all until the day they closed it. Somebody could have told me over the course of the previous decade that the bridge that I used every day was potentially going to get shut down. But I'm obviously a little bit sore about that. But I'm having faith that the City of Seattle is gathering the money they need to be able to have that thing open next year and put our lives back in order.
Okay.
Yeah, I also
Joe.
don't, I would be surprised if they did, to be honest, but I do appreciate the city's urgency to reroute traffic, but also make improvements to the streets to help flow of traffic as a person that has to take that as well. And when I toured it, what's interesting is if you look at the cracks that were there were like, even for me, I wouldn't be able to tell that that was the crack that would have caused it to go down as well. So I know that it is a very difficult situation and nobody wanted to be in that spot, but I do want to credit the engineers and the work being done to catch it before it became catastrophic. And again, you can see online, I think the West Seattle blog is here and they've covered it tremendously as well. They are working urgently to get a lot of that work done to open it back up. But I've heard a lot from constituents in White Center about the issues of congestion, obviously a lot from folks in West Seattle as well. So the biggest thing is make sure that they are good to go. And I feel confident that's going to happen with mid 2022, I think is the goal.
And I see Deb Barker put something in about a tree planting program in the comments here. So
nice. Good job.
So what are your thoughts about the Skylink gondola for West Seattle, since it could be ready sooner than light rail and could provide a way to cut carbons earlier? Joe first.
Yeah, I've met with folks from the Skylink group a couple of times at this point, and the intriguing one was using it as a feeder route. So not necessarily as a replacement for light rail potentially, but as a potential feeder route versus various jurisdictions. I think there will need to be some examination in terms of capacity and speed and how we can put things up. But I am very intrigued, if I'm honest, especially as an auxiliary or an augmentation of the routes being done right now.
Okay. So let's see.
Do I get to answer?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Yes,
Okay.
please.
Well, I mean, it's an interesting idea. Those of us, which I assume is most people who've been on kind of high capacity gondolas, can see maybe how that would be an interesting option for the particular geography of West Seattle. My concerns that I've expressed before are, we're bringing light rail to West Seattle, but we're not stopping in West Seattle. We're heading south from here to White Center, Burien, Renton, connecting with the other line at Tukwila. And this would essentially preclude that. The peak capacity issue is one that's going to have to be engaged. You can talk about hourly capacity, but when everybody gets off work, when the Seahawks game gets out, how long is the line and how long does it take you to get to where you need to be? There's the transfer issue. Everybody coming from West Seattle would have to transfer to get on to the light rail system instead of having a one-seat ride to where they're going. But I have asked Sound Transit to engage in a study of this, and we will formalize this, but I had a meeting with Peter Rogoff yesterday where I presented to him again the need for Sound Transit to do more than just kind of cut and paste some facts about gondolas, to really do a study about speed, capacity, et cetera, and to present that to the public and to the board so that people can make an informed choice based on objective data.
Okay, great. We've got time for one more question. Given the pandemic-enforced remote work experience we've all been forced to gain, would you hope to have the county services continue to be served via remote work, or do you think that a bricks and mortar government is worth the transportation load of the public sector employees? Dow first.
Well, I think it's both. There are services that are better provided in person. Clearly, both public and private employers are going to find that employees need to be together sometimes in person to be, just for creativity and serendipity. But we have moved pretty boldly to take advantage of lessons learned during COVID. For example, our entire natural resources, Department of Natural Resources and Parks, they asked if they could work remotely from home or from our hundreds of facilities around the county. So we moved them out of downtown. That's like 700 employees who are now going to be moving remotely. That's allowing us to reconfigure our downtown real estate, close down the administration building, ultimately make some massive changes. My goal would be for us to engage the employees in the way that works best for them and their work style, and works best for the service they're providing to the people. And that's going to be a shop by shop, function by function judgment about what works best. And there will be lessons learned along the way. But this thing that we're doing right now has given everybody in our society a new set of tools to be able to ultimately, I think, be more effective, be more places at once. That doesn't mean that sometimes we don't need to be face to face.
Okay. And Joe?
Yeah, I do think it is both as well, depending on the functions, but also the group that's there. And what I will add is that even having a potential 4-day work week. So instead of having the traditional 5-day, having potentially 4-day work week, King County, I mean, it is one of the largest counties in the entire United States, bigger than 14 states. If we were to pilot some of these innovative solutions for what the future of work could look like, would have ramifications, I think, across the country, if not the world as well. But agree with a lot of what the incumbent has said, but I also throw in some other innovative ideas like a 4-day work week.
All right, thank you. Michael, do you have your conductor hat on, and would you like to take control again?
Sure, actually, I've switched hats again because, I'm a joker. But we have unfortunately come down to the end of our time with both Dow and Joe. We promised them time to make good closing remarks. So you've each got about 4 to 5 minutes. I should have come up with some way to randomly decide who gets to go first. I think we'll give the benefit to the challenger to go first, I think. So we'll let Joe take 4 to 5 minutes to wrap up, and then we'll wrap up with our incumbent King County executive, Dow. So Joe, take it away.
Yeah, thank you so much. And knowing that it's getting late, I'll try to keep it pretty short too. But look, I'm not the typical person that you would normally find in public office. I am the son of refugees who was born in South King County and grew up very poor, especially after my father was in a car accident, right? I served as a janitor in high school. Even while I was student body president in college, I'd wash dishes to make ends meet. But I got involved is because this community gave me so much growing up. And I got involved because I wanted to ensure that our communities who were most on the margins had a voice as well. And for too long, those who were most impacted by policy were not at the table. A lot of the systemic things that we've talked about today are a result of that. And that's why I ran for the legislature a few years ago. And what I found when I got there was that was rampant. The idea that we needed more people with diverse lived experiences in positions of power. Because of the makeup of the legislature over the past few years, we've seen some of the most tremendous progressive policies, potentially in the history of Washington State, but for sure in recent memories. And that's because people who were engaged, committed to the community, working to make things better, were now at the table. We passed dozens of bills as it relates to homelessness, made investments in our communities, increased basic funding. But what I quickly realized was that oftentimes these solutions that we were trying to implement at the state level had to be implemented at the county level, whether it was behavioral health, climate change, even homelessness, all was at the county level. And again, look, I'm saying this as honest as possible, I do appreciate the incumbent's years of service. I do think that he has done a great job while he is there. I just think that this is time and a moment for change. This is a time for us to choose what the future of our county can look like. And we can do things different by having leaders who reflect those values as well. So thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. It is an honor to be in front of this group as always, as well as your senator. And I appreciate you taking the time, especially on this late evening, to chat about transportation. I love this stuff. I could chat policy all day long. So I like seeing other groups of people who do the same.
Kate, does that mean it's my turn? Or Michael?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Well, thank you again for having us this evening. We've been through quite a time. When COVID hit here, the first place in the nation with a major outbreak, I led with science, I led with reason, and because of it, we saved lives. And now vaccine verification is saving even more lives, and it will keep our recovery going. None of this is easy, but it is the right thing to do. I'm leading with Best Starts for Kids, the initiative I created, renewed with 63% approval in August, the nation's most comprehensive early childhood program, leading with Health Through Housing, thousands of homes to get those who are chronically homeless off the streets with the services to stay housed. In fact, today, the latest hotel up in North Seattle opened its doors to our new residents. My administration has repeatedly set the pace in environmental restoration, in equity and social justice, in animal welfare, in financial stewardship with AAA bond ratings year in and year out. But let's talk about transportation. I've been the region's leader on transit advocacy because, as I said before, the transportation we build creates the land use we're going to live with. The junction and all our neighborhood business districts grew up around the streetcar lines, around those junctions, compact, walkable, human in scale. With the rise of the automobile and dismantling of our fixed guideway systems and the construction of the interstate systems, sprawl and highly land consumptive development patterns took over. Most of it requiring millions of expensive and polluting automobiles to function. Now, I've dedicated my time in office to bending the curve back toward sustainability, toward rationality, toward robust public transit mobility from the neighborhood scale to the regional scale, and yes, for the person who put the question in the chat, even internationally. Now, as a Sound Transit board member, I was the first elected official to call for Sound Transit 2. We lost the first time, we came back and won. And this month, we opened the stations at University District Roosevelt and Northgate, a great accomplishment for this region. I led the creation of the King County Ferry District and the transfer of the Vashon passenger route from state to county control. And I helped make the district a full part of King County Metro. It's now our Marine Division in a Metro Transit department, new vessels and a beautiful new downtown dock. And when I was sworn in, I inherited a South Park bridge that had to immediately be closed. We had no money, but I stood with the community and created a plan and gathered the funds and got it done. And we opened a new South Park bridge. When I took charge of a Metro Transit agency that was in the midst of a financial crisis, we didn't panic and we didn't cut all the service. We worked our way back from that. And in 2018, we're named the best large transit agency in North America. And now I'm leading the conversion of Metro to an all-electric fleet. We currently have, as I said, we will have the second largest battery electric bus fleet in the nation, aiming for full electrification by 2035. And of course, as chair of the Sound Transit Board, and what was probably the heaviest lift, I united the region to create and approve Sound Transit 3, and we successfully battled to make West Seattle a part of the three-county, $54 billion truly regional high-capacity system, the most ambitious transit expansion program in the nation. That is my experience. The experience, the skills, the temperament to manage the biggest challenges and turn ambitious vision into reality. I'm honored to be endorsed by diverse voices who recognize the need for that kind of visionary and pragmatic leadership. The Seattle Times, Northwest Asian Weekly, the UW Daily, and the Seattle Medium, the Labor Council, and the East Side Business Alliance, Senators Murray and Cantwell, Governors Inslee, Gregoire, and Locke, Councilmember McDermott, Burien, Mayor Mata, 35 of my opponent's Democratic colleagues in the state legislature, and that includes Representatives Joe Fitzgibbon and Eileen Cody from the 34th District. But I'm particularly honored by the show of support I received from the voters in the primary election, winning by substantial margins in every one of King County's 17 legislative districts, including among the people who know both of us best, the voters of the 34th District. Thank you. Thank you for your attention to transportation and for our conversation tonight.
Well, thank you so much, Dow, Constantine, and Joe Nguyen. I wish that we had everybody in person, face to face, and we could applaud. I wish the folks on Facebook could applaud. Unfortunately, this is the best I could come up with. Hopefully the sound's kind of clear. Really appreciate you both being here. And feel free to head out and get back to taking care of those children.
Yeah.
Everybody else, we do have about 10 or 15 minutes of additional report out and chatting. So we invite you to stick around with us, and we will be wrapped by 8:30. So as we talked about at the top, if for some reason people have missed the news, we've got an update on soundtrack. Actually, I saw Lita come in earlier to check out in the meeting. Does she happen to be still lurking here? Maybe I can put her on the spot. Let's see. I don't think I see her there anymore. Yeah, we've if folks haven't seen the news, Sound Transit reached out to us and some of the other community groups to make sure that folks know, if you're wondering when the heck are they going to announce public meetings and things going on, the planned release, the draft environmental impact statement has been pushed back yet again. They're looking at sometime in the new year now. So presumably as we get toward the end of the year, we'll start to hear more about plans for public meetings and when that public comment period will last. As always, if you need to learn more, there's an easy kind of open house and other information you can go to. That's it looks funny, WSB link. I believe that's West Seattle Ballard link is how they came up with that, .participate.online, and that will take you to their site. I also want to bring to everybody's attention that one of the things we are working on is trying to put together at one of our meetings before then some sort of EIS or draft EIS 101. We're hoping to do that in partnership with Sound Transit. We'll see if that happens or not. But basically, pardon me. Basically, we want to sort of, some people, some of us are very wonky and have been through these comment periods and thumbed through dozens and dozens of pages of environmental impact statements on projects before, but we realize a lot of people maybe have never been through a process like this. And so we want to help people understand, why do agencies have to go through an environmental impact statement? What are the rules involved with going through that period? What do they have to do with the comments that get sent in? And then the other thing we want to look at is sort of really focus on what is it that an EIS or an environmental impact statement covers, and what doesn't it cover? Because we really want to make sure, part of what we set up at the top with our goals and priorities and why we exist is about educating people and helping collect your feedback or helping get your feedback to the right people. And so one of the things we believe in really strongly is we want to make sure that your feedback is going to be valuable. So the other key aspect that we're hoping to do with something like this is let you understand what comments can you make, what topics can you comment on that are relevant and part of this is a very legal, it's a federally mandated legal process. So what comments can you make that they have to listen to, that they have to respond to in the final environmental impact statement? Not because all of your comments and feedback don't matter, but now this process and this particular comment period is not the time to make a complaint that you don't like the way light rail cars look, or you don't want elevated versus a tunnel. But we want to help you make comments that are specific and relevant to the issues that are raised in the EIS so that you can submit the best feedback. Deb's got her hand raised.
Hi, and sorry, my video is being not working, but that's okay because I can talk. I just want to let folks know that Sound Transit has not only, as Michael said, talked about, extended the draft EIS date out into the beginning of 2022. They have also extended the opportunity for folks to apply to be on the citizen advisory groups, or CAGs. And I'd been on the stakeholder advisory group, or SAG, starting back in 2018. And I enjoyed the opportunity to look at the entire ST3 West Seattle to Ballard Link Light Rail corridor. What Sound Transit is doing with these next community groups is having them, rather, if you will, area specific. So West Seattle would need to have a group of folks on an advisory group, as would Ballard or Inner Bay, or you don't call it Lower Queen Anne now, you call it Uptown. So although if you know of folks who are interested in and perhaps not living in West Seattle, there are a few who don't live in West Seattle, and they'd like to get involved and participate in the next steps here with the citizens advisory groups, please have them apply, because Sound Transit is still looking for people.
All right,
Volunteer and go to meetings.
Courtesy of the West Seattle blog, I've got a clip of their announcement there. You have until 5 p.m. next Monday, November 1st. And that Go Here link also takes you to the wsblink.participate.online website that we previously shared. So thank you, Deb.
You bet.
Anybody have any questions or comments about the EIS process being delayed? All right, then with about 11 minutes, very quickly, not really much old business. It's an opportunity. Those of you who've stuck around with us to the end, thank you very much. This is a reminder that the West Seattle Transportation Coalition is an all volunteer run organization. So if you feel like this was a great opportunity, or questions got asked that you wish that you don't feel were being asked elsewhere and you're glad we exist, we would love to accept your donations. Reach out to let us know how you'd like to support us. We're also currently looking, we have some opportunities to get some very small funding streams coming in possibly. And so we're looking for a local community org that is, we are a state recognized nonprofit, but we are not a, we're not a 501c3 or anything like that. So we are looking for a fiscal sponsor who could help us, you know, maybe get a few $100s a year out of a stream that we have possible. So if you are a part of an organization or know one that might be interested in supporting us, let us know.
This is Larry Weimer, the treasurer we have a bank account with zero, so let's help get some money in there.
Yeah. Helping to pay for things like this Zoom account that comes out of our personal pockets. So with that, I'll move on to new business. Does anybody have any questions or action items or things that they need to bring up?
This is Larry again. I just first of all want to say there was a lot of us that put in a lot of effort to get this debate going tonight. So I just want to
Well done.
Yes,
Well done.
big round of applause to Larry.
Thank you.
Who did some heavy lifting. Is Phil still with us? Phil, I
Yes.
believe, had the one of our other board members, Phil Frick. Yeah, I see he's still there. I believe Phil had the original idea that we pulled this together. So big kudos to Phil. It's not often that we don't necessarily wade into the candidate debates, but it just seemed like too good an opportunity to have some, you know, locally raised boys here in the Southwest King County area who are both running for office at the same time, who, you know, some of us know very well personally, one or both of them, and a great opportunity just to hear the different ideas and vision that each of them is, you know, proposing for.
Well, I think the other thing too is I mean, this single position more than pretty much anything else has such a big impact on transportation. I mean, this really is, I can't think of any other elected official that has the same impact on transportation.
It is, that's a good point that we don't often think of, that it's not, right? It's not the mayor and city council, and it's not, you know, as I think Joe was trying to point out, you know, he's one of several people down in the state legislature that's working, you know, trying to get things and not always winning. So, but it really, yeah, the county really has a large sway over the things that we care about and advocate for. And even when they don't, as a county, the county executive often has a role to play, such as, you know, one of our questions where we mentioned that, you know, the county executive typically sits on the Sound Transit Board. So that's a lot of power and influence on the things that we care about.
Okay.
Anything else? New business comments, anything like that?
Yeah, I'd just like to thank Deb and you, Michael, and Larry especially for doing all the work to pull together, and it was a great thing. Thank you very much.
Looked like a good turnout tonight too.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Agreed, good turnout.
I will get this video up as quickly as I can so people can share with others they know who still haven't voted yet.
I have one quick question before we leave. Victoria, is there an update or a next meeting for the ferry task force?
Yeah, the next meeting's November 2nd, Wednesday.
Oh, Tuesday or Wednesday?
I think, well, you know, I think it's Wednesday.
That's the 3rd then.
Yeah. And then there's going to be one in December. So they're kind of back to back. We've gone a couple months without any meetings. And so I have a whole list of email questions I've sent Hadley. But I'd also like to propose that they come to one of our meetings and talk to the whole group in West Seattle about what's going on and what they're thinking.
Absolutely. Cool.
Sounds good to me.
Question, are we going to be meeting in 3 weeks? 3 weeks? Thanksgiving?
We were talking about
That
the
is a good thing to bring up here at the end.
Usually
Our
we
meeting
move-
would be on Thanksgiving. So no, we're not meeting on Thanksgiving. Do we want to move ahead a week or do we want to skip November?
Usually we've moved it up a week to the 18th.
Yeah.
Now, we don't have a DEIS, so no sound
Right.
transit. Who would
Yeah.
we have? Port has asked to come, but I don't know if they've got anything at this
Don't
point.
have anything new. They're just checking.
Victoria, can you get the ferries on such short notice?
I can certainly talk to them. I think, Larry, I think I sent you the information at one time. Do you want me to resend it?
Sure, yeah, make sure it's
I
up
can
on
do
top.
that.
Yeah, I'll get that out. I'll get
The
that out
only
tomorrow.
thing with the with the ferries is they wouldn't, I think they were planning on, a November meeting and a December meeting and then more of a check back or what we learned sort of presentation for earlier in the spring. But, I'm sure they'd love to come and do their thing.
Yeah, they've been going around doing their education or,
Right.
scoping. Yeah, so I'll send that on to you, Larry, again, and you guys can decide if you want to invite them.
For guests who may have not been with us in recent months, Victoria is one of our board members who's sitting on a community advisory group with the Washington State Ferries, specific to the Fauntleroy Way dock redevelopment project. So that's what the board members are discussing here right now. So it
And
sounds.
John, don't
Yes,
forget
and John Wright, who's here, is our other board member on that. So it sounds like we may possibly have our November meeting on the third Thursday of the month, which would be November 18th. If we're able to get some guests in from the ferries. We're, as Deb said, we're definitely not ready to move ahead with Sound Transit with the delay. So we will let everybody know on the email list if we're moving ahead with a special meeting on the third Thursday. Otherwise, we will probably see you guys in December, although usually it would be earlier in December as well. That's the downsides of us being a fourth Thursday community group is holidays often run ragged with our calendar.
We do not want to have a board meeting next month.
Well, we will definitely have a board meeting.
We'll have a board meeting. So
But we can chat about that offline.
Yes.
Okay.
Michael, this is Deb. Can I
Yeah,
say one more thing?
3 minutes, go.
Michael Oxman, you were asking about, is there a map of where the trees were planted on the Reconnect West Seattle route? And so you're asking, is there a map of the trees, and the document that you have doesn't show it? Do you want to contact me offline and I can tell you who to talk with about that?
I can just ask you right here that you got 35th and you got West Marshall Way. So that's about 8 miles of detour. 100 trees is a sparse amount of trees.
I'm aware, Michael, that they have only planted in South Park.
Dang. Well, guess what? We need a lot of trees, and trees are the only form of mitigation for this excess car smoke that's pouring out of the exhaust.
Yeah, and
Thank you so much.
That 35th is not part of the detour route, the official detour route. They
Yeah, I live 4 blocks from it. Yes, it is up by
I know.
above Roxbury.
There's their routes, and then there's where everyone else is impacted. So I totally get that you're on an area that's being impacted and not part of the mitigation program. You're not alone.
Well, it'd be nice to get one of the SDOT arborists into the West Seattle Transportation Coalition meeting and have them explain how they're mitigating this this backlog of cars on our streets. Thanks a lot, everybody.
You bet. Michael, give me a call and we can talk about how your voice can also be heard at some of those bridge meetings. Okay.
Sounds good.
Thanks, you guys.
All
Thank
right.
you, Michael Taylor.
Thank you,
Judd, and
Deb.
team.
With that, I would entertain a motion to end our fun Halloween meeting and get to
Motion
enjoying our
made.
evening. All right, all those in favor say aye.
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 All right.
Thank
All
you
right.
all.
All
Bye,
right. The
everybody.
weekend's supposed to be nice weather for the little munchkins.
Woohoo!
And the not so little ones.
Just go
Mine are
ahead
going
and
Yeah.
sweep out.
All right, guys.
your-